Episode 16 is a set of creepy short stories. If you'd like me to flesh out one or more of these stories into a long-form, detailed story, let me know in the comments. I went backcountry camping in the Adirondacks with my family when I was 13. We were pretty far off the beaten path. Both my parents are doctors, and at the time, they were avid hikers, so they weren't afraid of staying in the backcountry while other, less experienced campers might stay in the traditional family campgrounds. We spent the morning hiking in and exploring, and then they settled on a campsite that seemed perfect. It had some sunlight and shade, and there was a creek about a quarter-mile away. It was quiet except for the nature sounds. We hadn't seen another person since the parking lot about 4 hours prior. Once our tents were set up and my mom pulled out her book to relax, we knew we'd be allowed to explore. My brother and I were given permission to go as far as the creek and back, and we set out to look for animals or animal tracks. We reached the creek and walked to the water's edge. There, sitting on the rocks by the creek, we found a human eyeball. It was clean with fresh blood drops leading to it. The blood trail led to the path we had just taken to reach the creek. My brother and I ran as fast as we could back to camp and told our parents what we'd seen. My dad teased us and said he'd go look, that some unlucky animal had probably lost it in a fight with another animal. My dad set out towards the creek to calm us down and alleviate our fears. He came back about 15 minutes later and ordered us to pack up camp. We quickly hiked back to the parking lot, and my dad flagged down a park ranger and told him what we'd found. I distinctly remember him telling them that it was a human eye for sure. We cut our trip short that weekend, and my dad called the rangers the next day to see if they had any info on the missing eye. The rangers said they hadn't found anyone nearby. What it was doing out there, freshly removed from its owner in the middle of the woods, we'll likely never know. I used to teach at a middle school in Pennsylvania. I remember one day after school I had tons of paperwork to grade and knew that I'd have less distractions at the school where it was quiet after hours than if I went home to grade them. I had stayed late several times to grade papers in the past, and while being alone in the building wasn't ideal, I never worried about safety at the school until this day. It was winter, so it got dark early, around 5 p.m. I was working in my classroom with the lights on. My classroom window faced the parking lot, so when I saw the janitor get into his car and pull out of the parking lot, I knew I was the last person in the building. Mine was the only car left in the lot. About 30 minutes later, the school's security alarm went off. It scared me, and I gathered up my stuff quickly and headed to my car to wait for the police. When they arrived, I told them I had been in the building when the alarm sounded, but that I hadn't used any exterior doors, which would have set them off. They asked to see the security footage as 2 other officers checked the building. I took them to the school office where we played back the footage together. I watched the footage in horror as one of the back doors opened and 2 men wearing masks entered the main hallway, the hallway that led to my classroom. You can see them pause, stand together motionless for about 30 seconds, totally still, facing down the hall in the direction of my open, lit classroom. They never even looked at each other, just stood there. A couple of seconds later, I saw myself walk out of my classroom, pulling on my coat and carrying my bags. I walked towards the opposite end of the hallway and exited to the parking lot. Only then do the men turn and walk out of sight of the camera. The exterior camera footage showed nobody leaving but me. The police walked the building again and still found nothing. They guessed the men had gone out a window or maybe back through the door they had used to enter. I don't know what they wanted, but they had to know I was in that classroom when they broke in. They watched me leave from about 100 feet away. They could have run up behind me, but didn't. Maybe they hadn't realized the alarm would trigger, and if they tried to come after me, they might be interrupted by the police. I don't know, but as long as I worked at that school, I never stayed late in that building again. Years ago, I worked as a toll booth operator for a short time. The toll booths have an underground tunnel leading to the toll operator's parking lot. Really just a couple of parking spaces on the right side of the road. This made it less dangerous to cross the highway to get to your post, which was nice most of the time. Being a toll operator is a weird job. You're locked in this tiny room while people fly past you in their cars. I can't tell you how many people I saw almost hit the booth, either distracted by getting their toll money together or after too many drinks before getting behind the wheel. Also, you are brightly lit, but the surrounding area is dark at night, so it's pretty hard to see out of the booth once the sun goes down. It can be kind of a scary job, but on this particular night, it was scary for a totally different reason. It was later in the evening, around 11, on about my third week of working there. I was playing a game on my phone, and since it was dark, used the headlights approaching to know I had to look up and process the toll. Traffic was pretty light through this toll at this time of night, and I had been looking down, concentrating on my game. For just a second, I felt like someone was watching me, and I looked up. Just on the other side of the glass in front of me was a woman. She was skinny and pale and had a flat, expressionless look on her face. I couldn't see a car behind or near her, and there were no headlights around at all. I jumped, and as I did, she turned and moved across the wide road towards the little parking lot where my car was. I saw her disappear from view. It was policy that the parking lot door and our interior booth doors were locked at all times. A few minutes later, I heard and saw that someone was trying to open the interior doorknob to my booth. I was really scared at this point because I was alone in this toll booth, and I couldn't understand how she could get into the hallway if the door had been locked. I called the state trooper over the radio as the doorknob continued jiggling and rattling. After a few seconds, the rattling stopped, and a few minutes later, the trooper pulled up to the parking lot. She got out of her car and checked the exterior door. Then I saw her get back into her car, and she called me. She told me the door was locked, and I'd need to open it for her to come into the hallway. I was so scared because I knew whatever had tried to get into my booth would have had to come in via that exterior door and could still be in the narrow hallway. I opened the door slowly and peeked inside. There was nobody there at all. I walked the length of it and unlocked the exterior door. The trooper checked the hallway and, of course, also found nothing. The interior doorknob, my doorknob, was scratched and slightly bent as though someone had tried peeling it away from the door. At shift change that next day, I told Mike, the daytime operator, about what had happened and about the scary woman I had seen. He laughed nervously and told me that woman was the reason he only worked day shifts. He told me he'd seen her before, but she had only tried the exterior door. never the interior booth door. I don't know who or what she is, but I don't want to be alone in this booth when she finally gets in. I'm a trucker whose primary route takes me through the northern parts of the U.S. There's a particular route through the northern Minnesota region and North Dakota that nobody wants. And there's a very specific reason. Along this route, there's a way station we have to stop at to keep pace with our on-the-road, off-the-road schedule logs. I don't want to say exactly where this is, but truckers familiar with the route will know which stop I'm talking about. The way station and rest stop are fine, and it's really the only one for miles. But the creepy part is the separate pay showers building. Big trucker stops have shower stalls you can pay to use while you're long hauling. Most of them feel perfectly safe. If you're unlucky enough to need a shower at this one, you'll hear a lady screaming about halfway through your shower time. It is a horrible, blood-curdling scream that stops you in your tracks. It makes the hair on your arms and neck stand straight up. The first time I heard it, I immediately stopped my shower and checked the building as best I could. Then I ran into the main store and told them what I heard. The clerk calmly told me the showers are haunted, that there's nobody getting hurt, but that people report the screaming lady when they're alone in the shower building. I was stunned when he said this, and it took me a minute to process what he'd said. I turned and started back towards my truck. As I was leaving, one of the truckers that had been standing in the store overheard the exchange and said, "I don't ever shower here, not since I heard the scream 3 years ago. Ask any of us coming through here. We've all heard it at one time or another." I radioed my buddy who was hauling on a different route for our company, and he said he knew about the screaming lady too. Rumor was that a woman's life was taken in those showers, and her ghost is still there, reliving whatever happened to her. I made a mental note to never use those showers, and I hope someday that woman can find some peace. I'm a licensed python hunter in South Florida. Burmese pythons are not native to Florida. They're an invasive species that's taken over, decimating native Everglades species. They were likely introduced by people releasing them into the wild once they became too large and unmanageable, or accidentally escaped during one of our bad hurricanes like Andrew back in '92. Because of this, Florida has a bounty on hunting them. So most weekends, I drive south into the Everglades and look for these invasive snakes. The Everglades are amazing, uniquely beautiful, and at the same time incredibly creepy. When you cross into protected territory, you lose cell service, and if a serious injury were to happen, you'd need an airlift. You're literally in the middle of nowhere. There are also no more city lights. It's so dark that when you're in far enough, you can see the lights from Miami glow above the tree line in the distance, like a deeply setting sun. It's eerie to know how alone you really are. Everyone asks me about alligators, and yes, there's plenty of them. They were once rare, but that's not the case anymore. I see tons of gators when I'm hunting. They keep us on our toes. It really gets the blood pumping when you're wrestling a 7-foot python and you see gator eye shine just a few feet away. It really makes you think about what a strange and primitive place the Everglades are. I have lived my whole life here, though, so in many ways, it's the only backyard I know. But gators aren't the scariest thing out here. I have a pickup truck with spotlights on the roof and another mounted on the driver's side, like the kind the police cars have. I use the lights to scan the roads as I drive slowly, looking for the gleam of the snake hide. The lights are helpful, but there's not much that will cut through some of the more dense sections of swamp. I usually hunt with my friend Adam, but this night he couldn't come, and I didn't feel like staying home. It was almost 1 a.m. when I caught sight of my first small python, just a 4-footer. I got out of the truck and was just about to reach the edge of the water line where I'd seen the shiny scales moving when I felt it. I suddenly had that feeling that someone or something was staring at me. I looked up across the water at the mangroves just beyond and saw what looked like a 6-foot ape man. It was staring at me. It stood still for about 3 seconds. We were staring at each other. Then it turned and ducked into the scrub. I just stood there in absolute shock. There was only one dirt road leading into the area, and I was on it. I hadn't passed another truck or car. Nothing. So whoever or whatever that was had been in here on foot. By the time I looked down, the python was long gone, but I didn't care. I was so stunned at what I'd just seen. I turned my spotlight towards the area where it had been standing, and as I did, I heard a loud cry, like a guttural scream sound. Just as that sound faded into the night, I heard a second one, but this one came from farther up the road past where I had parked and was on the other side of the road. I got back into my truck and turned around. As I did, I started smelling something horrible. It smelled like a pungent, wet musk. I rolled up my windows and put the truck in gear. There was no way I was going to stick around and figure out what I had just seen and heard. Florida has a legend about a cryptid called the skunk ape. It's a hairy man-type ape with a foul smell. It supposedly lives in the swamps and has been seen throughout Florida, Georgia, and even Alabama. I truly believe I came face to face with one, maybe even two, that night. I bought a house in rural Maine to use as a hunting camp. The house was in what Mainers call the county, which is Aroostook County, the largest and northernmost county in the state. Towns are farther apart up here, and it's not uncommon to live 30 minutes or more outside of town. I would use the house on weekends for hunting when I could get away from work. The property was 43 acres with some open and some wooded areas. The wooded parts were dense and wild. It felt in some ways that I was the only person to have stepped foot in them, maybe ever. That was until one day, 3 years after I bought the house. I was taking stock of the land, getting familiar with it, and I had my dog with me. He's a German short-haired pointer, and at the time was young and adventurous. He usually ran a bit ahead and doubled back as I caught up to him. Deep ahead of me in the woods, I heard him bark. It wasn't the excited, I've found something bark, but a deep warning bark. I hurried to catch up to him, worried he might have encountered a bear. As I caught up, I saw him running back towards me. Then he hung back as I walked ahead of him. There was a tiny clearing, about 20 feet across, with 2 large stones, weathered and almost entirely covered in moss. As I approached the rocks, I realized they were grave markers. Etched into them primitively were names and dates. One read, Alice, 1843 to 1869, and the other read, Nathaniel, 1867 to 1869. As I read the dates, I heard growling behind me and turned to look at my dog standing just outside the clearing, staring at me. As I looked at him, he growled louder, and it started freaking me out. I stepped around the gravestones and started towards him, but then I realized he was growling and staring at something behind me. I turned fast and saw a man standing about 50 feet away. He was staring at us, and I stared back at him. He was wearing simple clothes, not modern ones, and he was holding a musket. Yes, an actual musket. As I stared, he disappeared. He didn't turn around. He just vanished. I couldn't get my dog to come any closer to me or enter the clearing at all. Needless to say, I had some research to do about the land I had bought. I searched online for history of the area and finally found an Alice and a Nathaniel, a story about the Nadeau family that had lived in the area. The farm had been robbed, and mother and son had lost their lives during the attack. When the father, Victor, had come home and found them, he had taken his own life. I can only imagine that I had come across Victor's ghost in the woods, forever watching over his wife and son. I went back to the clearing and cleaned that area from overgrowth a few weeks later. I also cleaned off the moss from the gravestones. I never found his headstone, though. I suspect because most French families were Catholic, he may be buried somewhere here in an unmarked grave, as self-harm was considered a sin. Maybe keeping the small cemetery in order would bring him some peace, since I haven't seen him since that day. I work as a cashier at a convenience store off a big highway. There's no end to the weird I see, and the later in the night it gets, the weirder things get. Mostly, there are overnight truckers and even some vacationing families, but I've seen my share of drug exchanges, cars full of drunks, and of course just tired, bleary-eyed late-night drivers. I hated the night shift, and my boss, Kathy, was nice enough to try and schedule me earlier most shifts. I just never feel totally safe by myself late at night, even though we have cameras everywhere and the back door is always locked. One overnight shift, I hadn't seen anyone for at least 45 minutes, and I was pretty into my Netflix show when I saw a man approach the door and pull it open. There were also no cars in the parking lot, which meant he had walked from the highway or someone had dropped him off here. Both options were weird for this middle-of-nowhere location. The usual bell tone sounded as he entered, and I looked him over. He was of medium build and was wearing jeans and a blue jacket. His hair was bright blonde and wavy, probably in his mid-20s. He walked past me without a look or a word and headed straight towards the bathroom, which was in the back of the store. There's a camera that records the back hallway, and I watched the security camera screen as he entered the men's room. There's a motion detector that turns on our bathroom lights, and I noticed they didn't turn on as he entered. I thought it was weird, but figured he could just turn on the switch. I hit play on my phone to restart the show and kept one eye on the back hall camera. About 30 minutes went by and he hadn't come out. I hadn't moved and nobody else had come into the store, so there was no chance that he had snuck out when I wasn't looking. At about an hour, I started to get pretty uncomfortable. An hour is a long time to stay in a public bathroom for any reason. After about another 30 minutes, I called my manager who was scheduled to come in about 3 hours. She told me to knock on the door and ask if he was okay. I told her I was not going to do that while I was here alone, for several reasons. She told me to wait for her and that she would be coming in early. I stared at the back hall camera, but nothing changed. She arrived about an hour and a half later, and we walked to the men's room door together. She knocked. "Hello? You okay in there?" We listened for a few seconds, and there was no sound at all. Kathy looked at me and pushed the door open. The motion detector was triggered and the lights came on. The bathroom was quiet. We listened for a second before going to the 2 stalls, which were open. The stalls were empty. There was nobody there at all. Where did he go? Kathy, I saw him come in here, and he never left. Check the cameras. She logged into the cameras and played back the last few hours. We saw him enter the store, go towards the back, and into the bathroom. Then she pulled up the back hallway camera. She saw him enter the bathroom and sped through the footage until we saw ourselves knocking on the door. She checked the outside cameras, and all we could see was that he came around the back of the building, which was dark, and then into the store. There were no cars. He was not dropped off. He had entered and never come out. Kathy checked the whole store just in case and found nothing. The whole experience creeped me out so much that Kathy only schedules me during day shifts now. I don't know what we saw, but at least I wasn't alone in seeing it. He came in and never left. What terrifies me is that if he never left, he may still be here. One of the things I love about hiking is that you never know what you'll see. Things look different at different times of year, and every trail changes slightly. You might see animals, new flowers, type of mushroom you've never seen before, or even find a trail you haven't hiked before. One fall evening, I set out hiking a trail that I was pretty familiar with just to get into nature for a little while after work and before the sun went down. This particular trail was about 4 miles long, and at about mile 3, it takes you through some hilly areas with dense woods. As I started the last mile, I saw something familiar. Just ahead of me in the leaves was the green turtle that's usually attached to my keychain. It was a gift from my mom that I kept with me now that my family lived on the opposite coast. I stopped and picked it up. I turned it over in my hand and saw the familiar scuff marks of my little green turtle. I pulled my keychain from my pocket, and sure enough, my little green turtle was missing. Strange. Must have fallen out of my pocket and I hadn't noticed. As I thought about it, I looked around and saw a trail, a very faint trail leading up into the woods. I decided to check out this new trail before leaving and headed down the leaf-covered path. I didn't have much time, though. The sun was setting soon. I hiked for about 10 minutes, and the trail got steeper, heading upwards towards a hill. As I reached a bend in the trail and turned right, I got a strange feeling. I felt like I was being watched. I looked around but saw nobody. When you're hiking and you feel like you're being watched, you wonder if there isn't an animal, something bigger, badder, and more dangerous that might be stalking you. I stood for a few minutes and listened. Very faintly, like a whisper, I heard my name. But not my actual name, the name my parents used to call me when I was very little. Little Bean. It was like a whisper, but all around me. I felt that maybe I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I took another few steps and leaned against a tree. I was getting a little lightheaded. I drank some water and the whispering stopped. I decided to turn back at that point, worried I was getting dehydrated. As I turned, I noticed that there was a cave just to my right. It was small and very narrow, small enough that only a child or a very small person could enter sideways. It surprised me because I hadn't seen it on the way past. I started back down toward the trail, and as I passed the cave, I heard, "Little Bean." It was so distinct this time, like somebody was saying it directly to me. I started running at this point. I was so scared. I ran all the way back to my car and got in. I immediately called my mom. As I sat there waiting for her to pick up, I looked up and saw 3 scary-looking guys at the far side of the parking lot. When I slammed my door closed, they turned and stared at me. It was almost dark now. I heard her answer the phone with, "Hey, little Bean, I was just thinking about you." "You haven't called me that in years, Mom." "I know, it just popped into my head, and then you called." As she spoke, I saw the men start towards me. They had no gear and didn't look like they were really hiking. One of them blew me a kiss as I peeled out of that parking lot with my mom still on the phone. Something had saved me from those 3 guys, I'm sure of it. They were probably following me, and if I had stayed on that main trail, they would have caught up to me. Instead, I took the trail up the hill and lingered longer because I had heard my name whispered from that cave.